So here's a little bit about myself. As Eva just introduced very generously, I'm the director of the Stevens Estate at Osgood Hill, a town-owned venue that typically welcomes thousands of visitors every year to this beautiful setting for weddings, events, tours, and other special gatherings. I came to work at the Stevens Estate in 2015. I was actually, for those of you who don't know, I was born and grew up in Manchester in the United Kingdom. I've been here almost 20 years. It'll be my 20th anniversary actually tomorrow, December the 2nd in 2000. I came to this country with big dreams. And it's possible that without my background, I wouldn't be in the position to be able to present this incredible story to you this evening. So I hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about Moses Stevens. You probably know more about him than I do. He was the son of one of North Andover's founding families. Moses Stevens was a founding member of the North Andover Improvement Society when it was established in 1885. Osgood Hill was Moses Stevens' home when it was completed just a year later in 1886. Improvement societies were created in America starting in the 1860s. Their objective was to aid in any way with its power every enterprise which has as its object the physical improvement of the town, and those that aimed to elevate its social life and develop a higher citizenship. Sounds like a very grand ideal. The late 1800s were a time of great upheaval and an age of big ideas and innovation. The fear of machinery taking over from cottage industries and the decline of craft skills created much opportunity for the connected and wealthy, but also presented difficult socio-economic conditions for everybody else. There was a highbrow intellectual and literary scene at the time, of which Boston was the center of the universe. Why not? In elegant rooms throughout the city, politicians and academics, philosophers and artists would gather and have animated conversations. In fact, Moses Stevens hosted the North Andover Improvement Society's initial meetings here in the library at the mansion at Osgood Hill. It looks a little different today, not too different. This setting was designed to be a place of conversation, of sharing ideas, bringing together the minds that would create a bold new future and the continued improvement of his town. It was probably Moses Stevens' desire for North Andover to have its own auspicious setting for these after-dinner conversations. Passionate commentary and enlightened discussion on the future of this still young country. It was probably Moses Stevens' desire for North Andover to have, the magnificent marbles, bronze ceilings, designs and symbols inside the mansion, the grand windows overlooking the sweeping driveway and wooded hillside were and still are an inspiration to all who visit. Moses Stevens' intent for Osgood Hill and its purpose in North Andover was no mere self-indulgence, I believe. This is a beautiful picture of Half Mile Hill, just behind the Stevens estate here at Osgood Hill. What limited knowledge we have of Moses' intentions behind Osgood Hill appear to be a mystery beyond what we now know is the obvious preservation of this beautiful landscape. But his vision for Osgood Hill could have taken any shape. The absolute intent behind what we see in the buildings and landscape today reflect a much deeper, richer source of inspiration. We also see a sincere belief in the persistent need for these surroundings to be used for purposes of enlightenment, for the appreciation of art and craftsmanship, and a respect for nature. This, Moses Stevens believed, in turn would compel citizens to become more involved in their community and for the creation of this higher citizenship. This quote from Oscar Wilde conveys the perspective that Moses Stevens may have held. The late 1800s were a compelling period where the battle over the preservation of historic buildings was first fought in the US, beginning when John Hancock's mansion in Boston's Back Bay was torn down in 1863. Moses Stevens was not aware of the permanent challenge that Osgood Hill would bring to North Andover residents in the future. The issues, including how and what decisions were made affecting the preservation and repurposing of old buildings in general, reflected questions about broader social and economic values and priorities at that time, and still do today. Each of Osgood Hill's estate buildings has its own significance and is unique in its own right. The estate was designed in the style of the aesthetic movement, a movement that survived just a few decades until the late 1800s. The mansion today represents one of the finest examples of aesthetic design that still exists anywhere. Osgood Hill, a noted historic landmark, has witnessed many of the highs and lows of the North Andover community and may have even hosted some of the historical events that changed history as it was designed to do. Moses Stevens understood the necessity to preserve and protect the land, but his efforts gave the town of North Andover a unique treasure, a defining legacy of his own that guaranteed the gift of history, culture, and education to future generations that most towns in America do not have. In my time at the Stevens estate at Osgood Hill, a multitude of clues have revealed themselves, as they would to anybody who spent any amount of time here. Alone, the clues have little meaning, but together they create an incredible origin story, in fact, one for the history books. This presentation will highlight just a few of the clues and their connection to this story, but there are many more clues that we have no time for this evening. My first clue revealed itself to me just after I joined the Stevens estate in August 2015. During a busy summer, thousands of people visit the estate as wedding or event guests. After one such event, a regular walkthrough of the Quiet Again house revealed 2 books that had been left on the beautiful oak desk in the green room. One of these books, St. Morrissey, piqued my attention since I was a former Morrissey-loving The Smiths fan from their hometown of Manchester, England. At the time, I saw no connection with the other book, A Room in Moscow, which you may be familiar with at that time. I took a photograph of the books. This is the photograph that you see today. And then I forgot all about it, and it was archived in my Google Photos. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I realized the connection of the second book. My favorite print, Edward Hopper's A Room in Brooklyn, was the only picture that I brought with me when I landed on these shores almost 20 years ago. And it's in my kitchen to this day. In hindsight, those 2 books set me on a path of discovery that continues to this day. Over time, I began to realize that nothing at Osgood Hill was accidental. Everything had a purpose, a space, a wall, a window, a niche, a nook, an array of wooden spindles, or a piece of fitted furniture. Over the last few years, I've had many aha moments. When the time of day or season of the year has made a dramatic impression of the sun's rays on a metallic ceiling or created patterns in the elegant brick bonding on the walls. The clues revealed themselves everywhere. It just took a little time. Clues to what? You might ask. In 2015 and 2016, I still wasn't sure what the answer was. It took several years to identify the rich source of inspiration that was the aesthetic movement. But as these clues revealed themselves, a little more digging led me down a rabbit hole of incredulity, of beauty and tragedy that could have been written by one of the great writers. This presentation will lay out some of the clues at Osgood Hill and what secret could possibly be in the answer to the mystery. So many clues. I'm not going to cover them all today. We haven't got that much time. But I'm going to go into a little detail on a few of them. The symbolism. This is the first thing that I noticed. Spindles and bobbins. You may be familiar with my hometown of Manchester as being the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It was based around the textile industry, and Manchester's cotton mills were thriving in the 1700s and 1800s, just like North Andover's mills were with the Stevens family. These patterns were easy to recognize, but they also opened my eyes to the fact that there would be more symbols. But what did they represent? Obvious to all of us, we know that Moses Stevens and the Stevens family, obviously they have their background in the textile industry, and that was why a lot of the textile symbols are in place still today at Osgood Hill. Oops. Sneaking ahead. The use of natural light is a signature feature of aesthetic artwork, as exemplified by James Whistler, who came from Lowell just down the road, but it's featured in much of his artwork. The David Neal painting on the staircase is a good example. While it was designed and positioned never to receive direct sunlight, the way the light falls onto the canvas makes the painting's features stand out iridescently or vanish into the dark background. The painting could appear to be hundreds of different paintings on a different day or under different conditions. Next is my favorite, sunflowers. Sunflowers are in abundance at the Stevens estate. They are imprinted onto the brass doorknobs, beautifully carved into wood blocks and in a multitude of casts along the second floor hallway. In a fireplace or hearth, including the tiny ones on the green hearth tiles in the library that still exist today, and the vivid large sunflowers in the glass tiles surrounding the fireplace in the guest bedroom. Sometimes hidden from sight to be joyously found by the guest reaching for their umbrella in the hall. This that you see now is a carving on the umbrella stand. Most, if not all, of these pictures and these sunflowers all over the mansion at Stevens estate are kissed by the sun at different times of the day or cast a dramatic shadow when light enters the space. Shadows that move, wax and wane like the moon. So this is my funky story of blue and white china. Very emblematic of the aesthetic period. In fact, Oscar Wilde is famous for quoting his blue and white china. My story began just in 2015. We have several dedicated senior volunteers that love working at the Stevens estate and help out whenever they can. One of our volunteers, a lady called Kathy, told me when I first started here that when her son was a child, they used to come up here to the Stevens estate and walk around the woods, and he would collect little fragments of blue and white china after the Stevens family left the property in the hands of Boston University. So when they came up here, he would be picking up these pieces of blue and white china from the woods. I didn't think anything of it until later when I found out about the aesthetic movement, but it basically supported that premise that we did have blue and white china in the Stevens estate at Osgood Hill back in the 1880s, and we've been working to replenish our blue and white china since then. So the aesthetic movement was my first discovery at Osgood Hill. This is a great quote by William Morris, who was an English arts and craftsman and one of the leaders in the aesthetic movement in the 1800s. The aesthetic experience, which involves nothing less than a total concentration on the perceptual details of the aesthetic object, is an experience designed to increase consciousness, exercise people's capacity for perceptual awareness and discrimination, and helps them come alive to the sight and texture of the world around them. As I researched more about the aesthetic movement, I learned that this was the design ethos that created Osgood Hill, from the natural boundaries and landscapes to the position of the mansion on the hill and location of its windows, the Riverstone gatehouse and the long winding driveway. All the elements that one could notice as distinct to this setting are based on the ideals of the aesthetes. When I first researched, i.e. Googled in my spare time, the aesthetic movement, the first description I found was a quote belonging to none other than Oscar Wilde, which is shown here. It brought me back to the St. Morrissey book that I read, that I had found a couple of years ago. Perhaps Moses Stevens was searching after the secret of life. The clues that had already revealed themselves, once re-examined, painted a more in-depth picture of the inspiration behind Osgood Hill. I found out that none other than Oscar Wilde would be associated in the early 1880s with the symbolic sunflower. There was no more prominent person who lived and breathed aestheticism as audaciously as Oscar Wilde in the early 1880s. Oscar Wilde toured the United States and Canada and carried the mantle of the aesthetes. First lecturing on clothing and fashion design, Oscar Wilde spoke in over 60 cities and returned to Boston 3 times to lecture on the aesthetic movement between 1882 and 1883. Guided by the response to his early shows, he customized his later lectures based on the interest of his audiences. His lectures on the House Beautiful featured the early aesthetic art movement for house building design, where local flora and fauna were celebrated in beautiful textures and carvings. His lectures had strong reviews in the international press, including the Boston Globe at the time, which can still be seen in online archives. Thousands of pages of words from his North American lectures have also been gathered and preserved in recent years, with cities across the country belatedly finding that Oscar Wilde lectured in their own city over 100 years ago, and the evidence has been hidden for all these years. It was during this time that Oscar Wilde picked a Boston-based publisher, James R. Osgood, to publish his first book. Osgood was also Mark Twain's publisher at the time and spent some time traveling down the Mississippi with him. While the venerable North Andover Osgoods, of whom Moses' wife Charlotte was a member, were not directly related to James R. Osgood, the publisher, the family had mutual descendants, and it is not unfeasible that they were introduced perhaps after one of Wilde's lectures. Who knows? So in articles and lectures, Wilde wrote of his experiences during his North American lecture series and described how he and his lecture were received with excitement and passion from town elders and businessmen and politicians who corralled around him after these events. These people asked for his advice on aesthetic design and were inspired to create big plans for town museums, cultural institutions, and schools of handicraft that Wilde described as being needed across the country for the benefit and enrichment of all. Even without finding Moses Stevens' program or ticket for one or two of these events in the Historical Society archives, every room of the mansion shares a secret, a detail, a feature, a material, or the all-encompassing experience of aesthetic beauty that we have all experienced when the sun shines over Osgood Hill. Back in the 21st century, with a little more understanding of the aesthetic movement and the role, and the role Oscar Wilde played in it, many more clues would reveal themselves at Osgood Hill. I will now show some more clues and examples of the aesthetic interiors at Osgood Hill, alongside some of Wilde's quotes from his 1882 American lecture tour. Were these words the inspiration behind it all? We'll start with the wood carvings. There are hundreds of individual plaques of carved wood at Osgood Hill that are inspired by nature. They feature grapevines, lilies, sunflowers, of course, acanthus leaves, and many other designs. Each was hand-carved and is unique. Again, these carvings are enhanced during the day by light and shadows that cast magical patterns across the walls. Here's a great quote from Oscar Wilde. "We want to see that you have nothing in your houses that has not been a joy to the man who made it and is not a joy to those who use it. We want you to create an art made by the hands of the people to please the hearts of the people too." Each time you visit the Stevens estate, excuse me, or take up a walk up Half Mile Hill on the Osgood Trail, there's an opportunity to explore the beauty that Moses Stevens had designed and envisioned. Winter, spring, summer, and fall. Each has its own beauty, and each season and every change in weather presents a new drama, a new filter through which to see the beauty of Osgood Hill. It never gets dull. One visit, though, will never reveal all there is to see. And this is a great quote by Oscar Wilde that reflects on the conditions of light, of nature that I've been describing, and how you must wait to experience them. That sunset in that picture was particularly astounding. Talking of which, Oscar Wilde had issued a directive that your workers be inspired by the sunrise as they go to work and return satisfied after a long day at work. Taking a walk up Half Mile Hill to see the sunrise is just as satisfying, as inspiring, if not more so, than the dramatic $1 million sunsets that we see as we depart Osgood Hill after a long day of rewarding endeavours. And here is Oscar again, espousing this message in 1882 to a bright Copper Beach morning in the fall. And at the end of the day, weary but refreshed for a peaceful night's sleep before we start again tomorrow. Incredible finishes, the carvings we've just seen, natural materials of marble, riverstone and rubblestone, rich red brickwork. These materials all tell their own story. They embrace Oscar Wilde's passion for using nature, locally sourced materials, and only the most passionate of craftspeople to create these incredible designs. I'll now show a couple of the rooms at Osgood Hill which feature these amazing details. This is the ingle nook in the hall. It proudly features the portrait of Moses Stevens. Is an amazing fireplace featuring locally produced, locally mined stone from, I think, Dorchester, near Boston. Carved with what it appears to be the sun's rays that come to life in the late afternoon when the sun comes down on the south side, on the west. This is a few pics of the library today. It still features the incredible patterns, and the sun flickers off the walls and through the spindles at different times of the day. It's still the most impressive room in the mansion. Sunflower patterns dance on the glass tiles of the fireplace. Beautifully carved wood featuring grapevines and lilies and hundreds of carved bobbin designs. The fireplace is incredible. It took a few years to notice that the deep grey and white granite of the fireplace did not extend to the sides of the chimney breast. Instead, a rich rose pink marble embraced each side of the fireplace, and the rich colours danced dramatically to a different tune at each new sunset. The ceiling features Celtic knots and whorls in copper panels with thick cord patterns that shine gold in the sunlight. This is my favourite room. This is the guest room on the second floor. My question here is, was this room designed for Oscar Wilde to be the honoured guest? Again, we see Celtic knots and crosses and sunflowers adorning the frieze around the walls. This room has the huge sunflower fireplace with lots of glass tiles of sunflowers. What a warm welcome for a weary traveller from afar. It also took a few years to figure out that a beautiful fitted cabinet can actually tell the time. The afternoon sun shines in from the southwest, and depending on the time of the year, it'll cast shadows on these wooden orbs that you see in this picture in different places on the wall behind it. This cabinet, fully functioning as a cabinet, is a wonderful example of the purpose and intent with which every decision was made relating to Osgood Hill. Now I'm going to stay quiet and let Oscar do the talking for a few slides. This is a beautiful example of one of the three-dimensional orb shadows that I mentioned on the last slide from this cabinet in the guest bedroom, the sundial cabinet. As you can see, this picture was taken at 4:15 p.m. on an October afternoon in 2019. Just a joke. Thanks, Oscar. This quote over the last three slides references the requirements of time and observation required for noble and beautiful designs to be made, and that such things cannot be taught, but have to be experienced to be learnt. The Osgood Hill experience leaves nothing to chance. In his lectures, Oscar Wilde talked about the United States as a youthful country and encouraged art forms of all types as a way to a beautiful national life. How an embrace of nature, design, and handicrafts are critical and vital forms of human development that will support a noble and honest citizenry. This quote from Oscar pertains to the easy to miss combination of the grey and pink marbles in the library fireplace. I'm going to move on one slide so I can show you what it looks like. So this is the fireplace that I'm talking about. Europe had its palaces and cathedrals, but here in the US, you have magnificent and rich resources and majestic backdrops that will present the dramatic landscapes for your house beautiful. Your marbles and gold leaf should be used to decorate your houses. Wilde spoke of not using these beautiful materials to build your buildings, such a waste, but to be a feature of beauty and to be enjoyed by all. I conducted some research on the pink marble, and it turns out that it was not American like all the other materials in the fireplaces, but was from a town called Salome in Turkey. This connects to the story of one of Oscar Wilde's first tragedies and the first play that he wrote that was shown in Paris in 1891. The story of Salome is of the well-known episode of John the Baptist and the Dancer. Is this a coincidence? Who knows? Pretty impressive, don't you think? The ceiling in the parlor has a beautiful olive green leather finish. However, in the late afternoon when the sun shines as it is setting in the west, you can't miss the gold leaf that completely changes the color and feeling of the room. This is the olive green leather ceiling when the sun is shining on the gold. Quite incredible. More beautiful ceilings. This is one in the oak dining room, and it features scrolls and lily patterns and has really dramatic hoppers and bronze finishes. These last few quotes will give us a suggestion of what Moses Stevens really had in mind for the town and people of North Andover when he thought about Osgood Hill, through the inspiration of Oscar Wilde's House Beautiful. It may also complete his vision of Osgood Hill as a source of strength, spirit, and enlightenment to North Andover and the great nation of America. So we wonder what Moses Stevens was thinking back in the 1880s. I wonder whether he agreed with what Oscar Wilde was saying. So this is a cool picture. In 2020, I found a beautiful collection of historic photos from 1886, courtesy of the North Andover Historical Society. This picture is from the 1886 library photograph I showed at the beginning of the presentation. What is the design on that? The honored guest chair's cushion in the library by the fireplace. So why don't we know the hidden part of the story of aestheticism and Oscar Wilde? Why don't we see a connection with Osgood Hill? The origin story of Osgood Hill was lost when Oscar Wilde was dragged through the international press less than 10 years after Osgood Hill was built, the result of lawsuits stemming from his love life. His name and reputation were in ruins, and nobody spoke of him for decades. Sadly, Wilde died destitute in Paris in 1902, in the prime of his life. As a result, Moses Stevens' origin story of this House Beautiful, if indeed it was so inspired, was perhaps lost to the town forever. A century later, however, we are better prepared than ever to shine the light on this secret tale once and for all, to create the happy ending this place deserves.